suddenly developed mysterious injuries when they saw certain names on the schedule. Receivers heard footsteps in their nightmares. These men turned violence into an art form, and by the time we reach number 1, you will understand why one of them became a legend who still dominates comment sections 15 years after he played his last game. Let us begin with a man who smiled at you right before he ended your season. John Lynch. There is something deeply unsettling about a man who is genuinely polite, well-spoken, and kind off the field, but transforms into something else entirely between the lines. John Lynch was that man. Teammates described him as one of the nicest people they had ever met. He went to Stanford. He carried himself with class. He shook hands firmly and looked people in the eyes. And then the game started, and John Lynch would disconnect your soul from your body with a smile on his face. His hit on Alandis Gary in 2000 is still studied today. Gary was a running back having a breakout season. He caught a pass over the middle and had nothing but green grass ahead of him. Then Lynch appeared, not running, flying. The collision was so violent that Gary fumbled the ball before his brain even registered what happened. He lay motionless on the turf while Lynch walked back to the huddle like nothing unusual had occurred. What made Lynch different was his ability to switch personas. Off the field, you wanted him to marry your daughter. On the field, you wanted him nowhere near anyone you loved. He played 16 seasons, made 9 Pro Bowls, won a Super Bowl, and every single week someone on the opposing team was reminded that the friendly guy from the pregame handshake was about to try and put them in the hospital. But Lynch was just the beginning, because the next man on this list earned a nickname that tells you everything you need to know. Steve Atwater, the smiling assassin. When Christian Okoye ran at you, you got out of the way. That was the unwritten rule. Okoye was called the Nigerian Nightmare for a reason. He was 6'1", 260 pounds of pure anger, and he ran through defenders like they were inconveniences. Nobody told Steve Atwater about that rule. In 1990, Atwater met Okoye in the open field. Any reasonable safety would have tried to slow him down, maybe push him out of bounds, live to play another snap. Atwater lowered his shoulder and ran directly into the Nightmare at full speed. Okoye went backward. Watch that collision again. The biggest, most feared running back in football was stopped cold by a man giving up 40 pounds. That hit announced Steve Atwater to the world, and for the next decade, receivers developed convenient cramps when they saw him lurking in the secondary. He earned the nickname Smiling Assassin because he genuinely enjoyed the violence, not in a sadistic way, in the way that a craftsman enjoys perfecting his craft. Every hit was a masterpiece to him, and he smiled because he knew what was coming and they did not. But Atwater played with joy. The next man on this list played with something closer to rage. James Harrison. If Hollywood needed to cast a villain for a football movie, they would design James Harrison. The man looked like he was angry at oxygen for existing. His resting face suggested he was planning violence, and his hits confirmed it. Harrison was undrafted, cut multiple times, told he was too small to play linebacker in the NFL. He responded by becoming the most feared defensive player of the 2000s. His hit on Colt McCoy in 2010 was so devastating that it changed how the league approached player safety. McCoy took a 3-step drop and never saw Harrison coming. The collision was head-to-head at full speed. McCoy was unconscious before he hit the ground. He should not have returned to that game. He did anyway, and the NFL realized they had a problem they could no longer ignore.
Harrison collected fines the way other players collected touchdowns. Over $100,000 in fines throughout his career. He did not care. He paid them and kept hitting. The league would send warning letters. Harrison would frame them. What made Harrison truly terrifying was his combination of speed, power, and genuine anger. He was not performing violence, he was executing it. There is a difference, and offensive players understood that difference every time they saw number 92 reading their routes. But even Harrison had limits to his intensity. The next man on this list had none. Brian Dawkins, Weapon X. Before every game, Brian Dawkins would disappear. Not physically, mentally. He would find a quiet space, close his eyes, and transform into someone else. He called this alter ego Weapon X, and Weapon X was not a nickname, it was a warning. Teammates described watching Dawkins before games with genuine unease. His eyes would change, his voice would change. The friendly, spiritual, thoughtful man they knew during the week was gone. Something else had taken his place, something that wanted to cause pain. His hit on Alge Crumpler is legendary in Philadelphia. Crumpler was a Pro Bowl tight end, 6'2", 260 pounds. Dawkins met him in the open field and delivered a blow so violent that Crumpler's Audi went completely horizontal before crashing to the earth. The ball came loose, the crowd lost its mind, and Dawkins stood over him with eyes that looked like they belonged to someone possessed. What separated Dawkins was the psychological element. Other hitters relied on physical gifts. Dawkins added mental warfare. He would talk to receivers during games, not trash talk, promises. He would tell them exactly what he was going to do, and then he would do it. The scariest part? After games, Dawkins would return to normal. The spiritual family man would reappear, and you realized that somewhere inside him lived something he could summon at will, something he called Weapon X. But even Weapon X feels modern compared to the next man on this list, because we need to go back to an era when fear had a different face entirely. Dick Butkus. There are hard hitters, there are violent players, and then there was Dick Butkus. He existed in a category that had no other members. Butkus played in the 1960s and 70s when the NFL was essentially organized brutality with minimal rules. And even in that era of unchecked violence, Butkus stood apart. He once said his goal was to hit players hard enough that they did not get up. Not to injure them specifically, just to make them question whether getting up was worth the risk of getting hit again. Opposing players called him an animal, not as an insult, as a genuine description. He bit people during games. He twisted ankles at the bottom of piles. He would hit ball carriers so hard that he would separate them from their helmets. In an era without face mask restrictions, Butkus treated the human face as a valid target. Runners would change their routes to avoid his area of the field. Quarterbacks would throw to the opposite side of the formation just to keep their receivers away from him. Offensive coordinators designed plays specifically around the principle of minimizing contact with one man. He was the original monster, the template that every fearsome linebacker since has tried to replicate. And 60 years later, his name still makes old coaches pause and remember what real violence looked like. But Butkus was brutal. The next man on this list added something else to his brutality: insanity. Ronnie Lott. In 1985, Ronnie Lott crushed his pinky finger making a tackle. The injury required surgery. The surgery would mean missing the playoffs. Ronnie Lott asked the doctor for a different option. The doctor mentioned amputation would heal faster. Lott cut off his own finger to keep playing. Read that again. He chose to have part of his body permanently removed rather than miss football games. And when people expressed shock at this decision, Lott seemed confused by their reaction. To him, it was obvious. The finger was in the way. Remove the obstacle. That story tells you everything about Ronnie Lott. Pain was not something he avoided. It was not even something he tolerated. It was something he genuinely did not seem to process the way normal humans do. Receivers across the league knew that catching a ball in Lott's zone meant accepting consequences. Not might mean consequences, meant them. He would deliver hits so punishing that players would check their bodies afterward to make sure everything was still attached. Multiple receivers have admitted they would intentionally drop passes rather than expose themselves to what Lott would deliver. He played 20 seasons of professional football with a body that he treated as a weapon. He won 4 Super Bowls, he made 10 Pro Bowls, and he did it all with 9.5 fingers because the full set was too inconvenient. But Lott was a force of nature. The next man on this list was a calculated general.
Ray Lewis. When Ray Lewis stepped onto the field, he had already won the mental game. His pre-game rituals were designed to create fear.
His entrance from the tunnel was choreographed intimidation. His eyes found specific opponents and promised them something terrible was coming. But what made Lewis truly dangerous was not his emotion, it was his intelligence. Lewis studied film obsessively. He knew offensive tendencies better than the coordinators who designed them. He would call out plays before they happened, and then he would be standing exactly where the ball carrier needed to go, waiting with bad intentions. His hit on Dustin Keller ended Keller's season and arguably affected the rest of his career. Lewis read the play perfectly, arrived at the exact moment of the catch, and delivered a blow that separated Keller from consciousness. It was not a lucky collision. It was an assassination that Lewis had planned from the moment he saw the formation. For 17 seasons, Lewis was the most feared linebacker in football. Running backs would bounce runs to the outside just to avoid his zone. Tight ends would find excuses to stay in and block rather than run routes over the middle. The entire offense would shift away from wherever Ray Lewis was standing. He won 2 Super Bowls. He was named Super Bowl MVP. He is considered one of the greatest defensive players in history. And he did it all by combining genius-level football intelligence with the willingness to deliver violence that ended careers. But Ray Lewis had a code. The next man on this list had none. Jack Tatum, the assassin. We need to pause here, because what I am about to tell you is not nostalgic. It is not celebrating old-school football. It is explaining why the NFL had to change. Jack Tatum was nicknamed the Assassin. He did not choose this name. He earned it through hits so violent that they altered the course of football history. In 1978, Tatum hit New England Patriots receiver Darryl Stingley during a preseason game. The hit was legal by the standards of the time. Tatum launched himself headfirst into Stingley as he reached for a pass. Stingley's spine was damaged on impact. Darryl Stingley never walked again. He spent the rest of his life as a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. He required round-the-clock care until his death in 2007, and that preseason hit haunted everyone who witnessed it. But here is what made Jack Tatum truly terrifying. He never apologized. He never publicly expressed remorse. He never reached out to Stingley personally. When asked about the hit years later, Tatum said he was just playing football. The game had consequences. Everyone knew the risks. Many people hated him for this, but Tatum represented something real about football. The violence is not accidental. It is the product. And Jack Tatum delivered that product more efficiently than anyone who came before him. The league eventually changed rules specifically because of what Tatum did. Hits to defenseless receivers became penalties. Leading with the helmet became illegal. The NFL looked at what happened to Darryl Stingley and decided that some forms of violence were too much, even for professional football. Jack Tatum forced the league to confront what it actually was, and they have been trying to find the balance ever since.
Dick Night Train Lane. If Jack Tatum forced the league to change in the 1970s, Dick Night Train Lane forced them to change decades earlier. And he did it with a technique so violent that it now carries his name as a warning. The clothesline tackle, also known as the night train necktie. Lane would target runners and receivers not at their bodies, but at their throats. He would extend his arm like a steel bar across their necks and use their own momentum to drive them into the ground. This technique was not illegal when Lane played. Rules about tackling were minimal, and Lane exploited every gap in the rulebook with creative brutality that made him the most feared defensive back of his era. He still holds the NFL record for interceptions in a single season, 14 in 14 games. And he got those interceptions because quarterbacks were terrified to throw anywhere near him. When they did, receivers would sometimes pull up rather than expose their necks to what was coming. Lane played 14 seasons of professional football and changed how the game was officiated forever. The NFL eventually banned the clothesline tackle, They banned horse collar tackles. They banned targeting the head and neck area. These rules exist because of one man who demonstrated exactly how dangerous football could become without them. Dick Night Train Lane is the reason the rulebook grew. He played in an era of minimal restrictions and showed the world why restrictions were necessary. And that brings us to number 1. But before I tell you about him, I need you to understand something. Every player on this list was feared. Every player on this list delivered violence that ended careers and changed lives. But only one of them became a legend that transcends the sport. Only one of them is still discussed in comment sections 15 years after his death. Only one of them represents what could have been. Sean Taylor. When Sean Taylor walked onto a football field, the atmosphere changed. You could feel it. Teammates describe a physical energy that radiated from him. Opponents describe something closer to dread. He was 6'2", 215 pounds, and he ran a 4.3 40. Those numbers do not make sense together. Men that size should not be that fast. But Sean Taylor was not built according to normal specifications. His hit on punter Brian Moorman during the Pro Bowl is the most famous in All-Star game history. The Pro Bowl is supposed to be an exhibition, light contact, nobody tries too hard. Sean Taylor either did not receive that message or chose to ignore it. He came across the field at full speed and delivered a blow to Moorman that belonged in a playoff game. Moorman went airborne, the crowd went silent, and then they went crazy. Because even in a meaningless game, Sean Taylor could not suppress what he was. But what made Taylor truly terrifying was not his physical gifts, it was his eyes. Multiple players have described looking into Sean Taylor's eyes during games and seeing nothing they recognized as human emotion, just pure predatory focus. He was not playing football, he was hunting. In just 4 seasons, Sean Taylor was already considered the hardest-hitting safety in the NFL. Coaches were designing entire game plans around avoiding him. Running backs were bouncing plays to the opposite side of the field. Receivers were developing sudden awareness of exactly where number 21 was standing at all times. And then it was over. On November 26, 2007, Sean Taylor was shot during a home invasion in Miami. He died the next day. He was 24 years old. The football world stopped. Teammates wept openly on camera. Opponents who had feared him expressed grief that seemed to surprise even them. Sean Taylor was gone before anyone truly understood what he might have become. And here is why he is number 1 on this list. Every other player had full careers. They accumulated statistics and highlights and championships. We know exactly who they were because we saw the complete picture. Sean Taylor remains a mystery. We saw 4 seasons of dominance, and then nothing. We saw glimpses of a player who might have become the greatest safety in NFL history, and we will